What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham Jason Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network, on Peacock, and on Vice. And usually we talk about Dark Side of the Ring here on the channel, but today we're talking about the episode of Vice Versa on Chyna that went up back on June 17th, I believe it was, about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. Very good documentary, fucking depressing as shit, obviously, given the subject matter. This was not, like I said, an episode of Dark Side of the Ring. It gave me Dark Side of the Ring vibes. There wasn't any reenactment of stuff that happened with Chyna like we would see in Dark Side of the Ring. We got actual footage of Chyna from a documentary that they were filming with her called Resurrection of Chyna a few years back, right before she passed in 2016. We got a lot of talking heads from people that were involved in the documentary. We hear from her sister, her mom. We hear from Sean Waltman, Kevin Nash, Billy Gunn, a lot of people who knew her close, who knew her very well, Mick Foley. I'm not sure when this footage was filmed. Mick Foley still had long hair at this point, which he may have had long hair last year, but I'm pretty sure he's had short hair for a while now. So they may have filmed the stuff for this documentary a while ago, and they're just now putting it out. But I believe that's why they did not do an episode of Dark Side of the Ring on Chyna, was because they were aware, the producers that was, they were aware that they were making this documentary instead for the Vice channel. Now, I think they also worked with the producers on this special as well, did the, Evan Hunsey or whatever his name is, that are involved in the Dark Side of the Ring stuff. They might have been involved a little bit with this as well, which was cool. Again, a very good documentary. It does clock in at 2 hours, which I thought was appropriate. A lot of those Dark Side of the Ring episodes, at least recently, some of them didn't really warrant an entire episode about, but some of them could have benefited from being 2 hours, like the Warrior one, which WWE did for the A&E documentary, or A&E did, or whatever, called the biography one. That one was 2 hours. This was 2 hours too, which I thought was great. So I took a lot of fucking notes here. There's a lot of stuff to get through, so let's just get right into it. At the very beginning of the documentary, they document her issues that she was dealing with at the time. Obviously, she passed in April, I think it was April 21st, 2016 to be specific. That was the same day I went to an NXT house show in Lowell, Mass. Actually, the same show where Samoa Joe won the NXT Championship, and I bring that up. And it's relevant because at that same show, they actually did a 10-bell salute for Chyna at the very beginning of the show, which I thought was cool being there. But yeah, so they show her in Tokyo in 2015. During the making of her Resurrection of Chyna documentary, that wasn't, I don't think, her idea. It was Anthony Enzaldo, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He was the manager of Chyna. She met him many, many years ago, I think while she was doing the VH1 shows and stuff like that. We hear from Anthony. I was very surprised he even agreed to be a part of this, because he does not come across from this thing very well at all. He just screams like a major piece of shit to me with all the stuff that they say about him, and that he even admits to doing and stuff like that, like filming her body, spoiler alert, which is fucking disgusting. So we hear from him, we hear from Eric Angra, and at least Eric, he did a lot of stupid shit, including at the end there by telling Chyna, oh yeah, I'll be over today to help you out, blah, 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 and then canceling on her, telling her that he was sick, even though he wasn't. And he does not come across well at all either. He was doing a lot of drugs at the time. He at least shows some signs of remorse and regret for everything that he was involved with Chyna during the making of this documentary. So there is that, but we hear a lot from him as well. The film was never completed, obviously, because she died during the making of it back in 2016. So we also hear from one of the producers of the documentary, of that Resurrection of Chyna doc, named Rob Potlow, or it's Potyllo, and he was a major fan. He comes across the best out of everyone involved in the making of that documentary. And the whole documentary was supposed to be about her, road to redemption, and that rebuilding process for her only lasted 4 or 5 days during the making of this documentary at the very beginning, and it was all downhill from there. Chyna admits in a lot of the footage that she was using anti-anxiety medications at the time. She was using sleep aids as well. And it wasn't the documentary that Rob was expecting when he got into it. So this was the part of the documentary of this special that I didn't really like a lot, that Dark Side of the Ring really doesn't do. Dark Side of the Ring tackles things chronologically. This one goes back and forth a lot. It goes from present day to when she was wrestling, to 95, to 2001, back to 2016. It goes back and forth a lot, and it's hard to follow at certain points, and it doesn't have a great flow to it. But I do like, obviously, that they covered all of her issues dating back to when she first started wrestling. So she got first involved with wrestling Joni Lee was her name at the time, or Joan Marie Lohr, I think is how you pronounce her last name, her Chyna's real name. She started training in 1995. We hear from Chyna's sister Kathy, who talked about her early struggles with, body dysmorphia and stuff like that, being really strong. And she didn't grow up watching wrestling, but she felt really confident lifting weights and stuff like that. And she wanted to be an entertainer. So she saw wrestling, saw it as a good opportunity to kind of enter that entertainment business. She asked her sister about it. She said no, so Chyna went into it by herself. And she loved putting in the work. She was at the gym all the time, training, getting better, wanting to be the best pro wrestler that she could possibly be. But one of the friends that they interviewed for this doc said the wrestling was not where she should have been. They say that right off the bat, like that was probably the worst thing that she could have done with her life. And not that wrestling was terrible, but obviously it didn't do her any favors. So, again, we go back to present day, to 2015, where she wasn't in a great place going into the 2015 New York Comic-Con that Anthony signed her up for, to had her do. She was in a terrible mental space at the time. She absolutely should not have done it. We see footage of her reconnecting with Foley, who she was really close with, which was cool, and we hear from Foley too. And he even said, I didn't think it was the best idea for her to be doing that type of stuff at that stage in her road to recovery at that point in time. So she was in Japan prior to that point, and it was only after coming back to the U.S. that she started doing public appearances and stuff like that at the behest of her manager. And we hear a lot from Vince Russo as well, and you're probably thinking, oh, that piece of shit, who cares? But honestly, I think Vince Russo comes across the best out of almost anyone else in this documentary, which is something I did not think I would say. I mean, obviously, at various points, it's like, oh, yeah, I created DX, which might have been true, but, the guy eats his own shit all the time. He obviously believes his own bullshit a lot of the time, but with stuff like this, he knew Chyna very, very well. He was very close with her, so I thought he was a great get for this documentary, because he was very honest about a lot of stuff, and he knew her very well. And, he thought mistakenly that she would be okay when she came back from Japan, which obviously she was not. Going back to 95, she was approached with the idea while training to be a pro wrestler. Right? I think it was the Killer Kowalski School, the same school that Triple H trained at as well, among other people, Kofi Kingston, I believe Damian Sandow too. She was approached with the idea of being a bodyguard, and she went to Triple H about it, thinking that it would be a good fit. Triple H was super high on the idea. She knew him from her hometown. I guess they kind of grew up in the same area. And she clicked with Triple H and Shawn Michaels right off the bat. And they wanted to get her hired. Vince, on the other hand, did not like the idea. Because up to that point, I don't think they had ever done a female manager for a male superstar. And I was thinking, while I was watching this with Alexis, have they even done that since? I'm sure they have. I know we have Reginald right now with Chyna and Nia, but that's not remotely the same thing, obviously. Have we seen a female superstar for a male superstar in recent years? I'm sure we have at some point. I couldn't think off the top of my head. And I'm going to feel stupid when someone names one to me, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, of course. But I feel like we just don't see it all that often. And obviously it has to have the right people involved kind of Santino and Beth to a certain extent, a little bit, back in 2008 during Glamourella. But she wasn't really a manager for him. She was more of like a valet, and they were romantically linked and whatever, which Triple H and Chyna were not, at least on screen. But nonetheless, Vince did not like the idea of Chyna managing Triple H. He didn't like big girls, apparently. But Triple H and Shawn pushed hard for it, and they eventually got her hired. And the name Chyna was supposed to be an oxymoron, because when you hear Chyna, you think, oh, little antiques, and it's like fragile, stuff like that, like a China plate or whatever. Whereas she was the exact opposite. She was massive, and she was strong, and could more than hold her own. So that was supposed to be the whole origin of the name. Triple H and Chyna, on a personal level, got very serious with their relationship within 6 months, kind of falling in love with each other after a while. Vince Russo, again, takes credit for D-Generation X. Of course he would. And he says that D-Generation X at that point were her family. She didn't have any family. She hadn't talked to her mom in 27 years, and we hear from the mom later on discussing that. But they were her family at that point in time. So she didn't drink or do drugs up to that point. All the boys did. She didn't. And Chyna even says, we hear a lot from her on one of the radio shows. I forgot which one it was. It was one of the Howard Stern show maybe? It was either that or another one, but she was on a radio show back in the late 2000s or late 90s, early 2000s, where she said that Chyna, or where Chyna said that Triple H was the love of her life. And it became not a secret backstage that they were together. People were apparently surprised that they were together, given Triple H's stature in the company. I mean, he wasn't really high up on the card at that point, but like, people couldn't really grasp the idea that these two would be together. Someone that looked like Chyna and someone that looked like Triple H would be together, which, who fucking cares? You know what I mean? If they're happy, which obviously they were at that point, so who gives a shit? But that's not just the wrestling thing. That's like a, everyday thing. That's a normal thing, unfortunately, with people just being judgy and whatever. But at any rate, they talk about her getting plastic surgery to get more feminine features because she felt maybe insecure about being very muscular and being manly and stuff like that, and she wanted more feminine features. So she didn't want to be on her own, but because she became so big, not literally, but like figuratively, as a superstar, she transcended superstardom and became even bigger than Triple H at one point, I would argue, especially early on when she was kind of more the focal point than Hunter Hearst Helmsley was. But she became big, and she didn't really want to go off on her own, but they kind of had to branch her off on her own at one point. And her facing and beating men was believable. We hear that from Vince Russo. We hear that from a few other people. And honestly, I completely agree. You watch a lot of the matches she was having at that point, and Jericho's talked about like how he wasn't high on the idea of being co-champions with Chyna. I'm sure not a lot of the guys didn't love the idea of working with and losing to a woman, but like, fucking deal with it. Like, clearly she was credible. She could absolutely take the fight to a lot of those men, especially someone like Jericho. I mean, give me a fucking break, you know what I mean? It depends on who it is, but probably a good portion of the roster at that point, she could hold her own, and it wasn't, unbelievable to think that she could, take the fight to a lot of these male superstars. And even today, today we have such a smaller roster in terms of like size and stature and stuff like that. I could absolutely see her in the ring and beating up a guy like an AJ Styles or a Daniel Bryan and a Sami Zayn and people like that. Maybe she wasn't going to be pinning The Rock, but she did hold her own against a lot of these people in like the Rumbles and stuff like that, to the point where it wasn't really out of the ordinary to see her as the Intercontinental Champion, to see her in a King of the Ring tournament, or to see her in a Royal Rumble match. You know what I mean? So she became a spokesperson for WWE around that point. Her mom randomly pops up and says, I didn't talk to her in 27 years. I'm like, wait, what the fuck? And they just go to commercial, and they just don't follow up on it for a while, which was weird. So then they fast forward back to present day, and Eric recalls arguments with Anthony about, like, Anthony wanted to take control of the project and say, we should do this, that, and here's your shots, blah, blah, blah. Eric was like maybe not the director, but he was like the producer, whatever. He wanted his shots, and he wanted to be his own vision. So Anthony went off on him. Eric was like, fuck you, dude. And Anthony later apologized, so they made up, continued on with the project. Chyna she admitted here, going back to like the early 2000s, she did Playboy. She did a Playboy shoot, making more for that one shoot than she did for 5 years in WWE. They probably didn't sign her to a very expensive contract at first, and they didn't renegotiate her contract. So she got paid a lot of money doing that, which probably planted the seed into her head for later on when she wasn't doing well, that she could do porn and stuff like that and make a shit ton of money. So at any rate, Vince put her in the women's division, which she felt like was a step backward, which it absolutely was. Again, she was the Intercontinental Champion, and unless there were women on her level that looked like her, that were as big as her, that were as dominant as her, that she could feud with, other than that, her facing Jazz, listen, I like all these women, but like her and Trish was a joke. Like, Chyna would kill her in 2 seconds. So you kind of get to a point where she kind of has to stay in the men's division, which I don't think would have been the worst thing. I wasn't a fan back then, so I can't tell you, it got old after a while, or people stopped believing it. I don't think so, but that's my own opinion. So she felt like going back to the women's division, which they were starting up again around that point, was a mistake, which, again, I agree. She got the feeling that something was going on at a certain point when Triple H broke her heart. So they talk about how Triple H broke her heart because Triple H and Stephanie were flirting during their storyline. Because remember, Triple H and Stephanie started working on air as a couple before they ever hooked up in real life. They were flirting already at that point. Like the on-air marriage and stuff like that. I don't know if they were officially together behind the scenes. They were probably teasing it or flirting or whatever. But they weren't like an actual couple. He was still with Chyna at that point, which is pretty shitty that he would let that go on and not break up with Chyna. But eventually, again, she didn't want to be nosy. She didn't want to ask him about it. She didn't want to be that girlfriend or that significant other or whatever. And eventually got to a point where that's exactly what happened. She found out that he was with Stephanie and whatever, and she found a love letter from her to him from like a year earlier, which is fucking ridiculous. I mean, if it was a couple, that's not good in any circumstance, but especially when it goes on for a year and you don't say anything, give me a fucking break, you know what I mean? So, at any rate, they break up. She wondered how it would affect her career, because this wasn't any just breakup. I mean, obviously it was the love of her life, but it wasn't any ordinary breakup. I mean, this guy was now sleeping with the daughter of the chairman of the company, so he would always get the better of any push that he was a part of. It wouldn't really affect his career negatively at all, but it could affect her career very negatively very quickly, which it did. So it got to a point where WWE did not renew her contract, and she wanted on, she felt like she was on the level of a Stone Cold Steve Austin. She felt like she was owed $1 million a year, which, depending on what people were getting paid at that point, which I couldn't tell you what it was, I don't think she would have been worth $1 million a year. Her stock at that point in time, we're talking like '01, just wasn't there. Apparently, this wasn't mentioned here in the doc, but she was offered like a $400,000 deal and she turned it down. And she went from that to having no money, so she probably should have just taken that. I can understand why she wouldn't, though, because she felt like, I wanted $1 million, I didn't even get half of that. I'm not sure what she was making prior to that point. Probably a little bit better than $400,000 was what she was worth. Was she a Stone Cold for the company at that point? I don't think so. I mean, she was a major star, but was she as big as Stone Cold? The answer is no. Could she have been paid better? Probably. Definitely, I think. $1 million, though? I mean, I'm not a businessman. That sounds a little bit high to me, but it was the Attitude Era, and I don't know if that was the type of money they were throwing around at that point because they had the money to spend with all the money they were making during that period. But anyway, so they said no. Russo's kind of believed that she had a right to have an ego, which she did, but $1 million, I don't know. So Chyna said that she got a fax while she was at a deli that she frequently visited from the WWE. She got faxed while she was there saying that she was being let go. And she says in her last interview that we hear from her in 2016 that there will never be another Chyna. So going back to the early 2000s, post WWE, she tried acting, was in a few different stuff, didn't exactly pan out. Started self-medicating, started drinking vodka. She felt really lonely, and enter Sean Waltman, aka X-Pac. It was instant love from the moment that he showed up on her front doorstep, he said, and they were just absolutely terrible for each other. He was in an awful spot at that point. She was in an awful spot at that point. They were hiding drug issues that they were having from each other. He was doing crystal meth at that point. Just fucking terrible shit. And it was very abusive and shit like that. So it was during that period when she was seeing him that she was contacted by New Japan Pro Wrestling to come in for a match in 2002. And Masahiro Chyna wanted to wrestle her because, he saw her as an attraction. A lot of the guys did not want to face her, but he did. So they actually faced each other in the Tokyo Dome in 2002. And from what I saw, it looked like a good match. Chono really enjoyed the match. The audience was into her. And Chyna was super proud of the match. And it probably would have continued, her time in the company probably would have continued had Waltman not brought drugs over to Japan, which she was involved with. She got caught up with it, and New Japan fired her. So it was at that point where there needed to be an intervention. She denied rehab. Her friends kind of had an intervention with her in like 2003, and she agreed to go, but within 15 minutes of being there with her sister, she's like, fuck this, I'm getting out of here, blah, blah, blah. She stormed out, and that was the last time that she was, seen by her sister. And they were very close, so to kind of break off that relationship really hurt the sister a lot, and it hurt Chyna, I'm sure, too, because she felt lonely even at that point. So she ended up going to jail, I guess, I don't know for how long, but for beating up Sean Waltman, because it was that abusive of a relationship. They show clips from the sex tape, which they did, and she thought it was funny. They always got back together anytime it ended. It was just a terrible relationship. Back to present day, she was in Vegas in 2015 with the production crew for the documentary, which is awful, because obviously that only encouraged her demons at that point, taking part, which Anthony kind of facilitated, a celebrity poker tournament she was a part of. She did drugs with Eric while she was there, including heroin and meth, just terrible shit. And it just did not work out well at all. Back to the early 2000s, she did the Surreal Life 4. That was where she met her manager, that was where she met her current, at that point, manager Anthony. She also did celebrity boxing, Fear Factor, really anything to get on TV and remain relevant. And then she was offered big money by the porn company Vivid in 2008, and she took it, of course, and she felt like she was living in a living hell, is what she said, I think on the Celebrity rehab show or whatever. It was televised. So we hear from one of the doctors that she was involved with, that, tended to her and stuff like that, saying that the childhood trauma is a big reason for a lot of these addictions, and Chyna was no exception. So we found out that her dad was a drug addict and an alcoholic. Her dad stabbed her mom with a butcher's knife at one point. The mom didn't pass away, obviously, because we hear from her on this episode. Her grades started to drop in high school. She hung out with the wrong people. And then at 16, she started living with her dad and never saw the mom again, at least not until the final few months or years of her life. So Anthony wanted her to make amends with her family in 2015. She did things that she didn't want to do because of Anthony. Anthony kind of made her things that she didn't want to do, including visiting her father's grave, who had died. Visiting her father's grave, it just fucking terrible shit. Just absolutely awful stuff, including that. And we see her breaking down, telling her father in the grave, "Oh, I'll see you soon," which is just eerie watching it back now. And obviously a lot of that stuff did way more to hurt her than help her. She decided to cut everyone off and moved to Japan at one point, probably in the early 2000s after ditching the porn stuff and wanting to really become a better person, get her life back on track, all this other stuff. So while she was in Japan, she became a school teacher. She got baptized, she joined the Mormon church, really turned her life around. And that was when, while she was over in Japan, and she got wind of this, and she was talking about it with Russo and people like that, and she was doing vlogs about it and whatever. In 2015 was when Stone Cold did the interview on the WWE Network with Triple H, asking him, when are we going to see Chyna in the WWE Hall of Fame? And that was where he gave that dumb answer about how, I don't want my daughter, if I put her in the Hall of Fame, I don't want her looking up Chyna to see all this stuff that she's been a part of, blah, blah, blah. And to his credit, Vince Russo makes a great point, is fucking stupid. Because think of all the people that are in the Hall of Fame that have done even worse shit than just doing porn. Benoit's not in the WWE Hall of Fame, but people are in there for frickin' murder. Jimmy Snuka being one of them. And he even almost went to jail for that before he died. That was after this happened, but still. A lot of the people in that Hall of Fame are just terrible people. It's not even close. Did a lot worse stuff than Chyna did, so. And people were even involved in porn, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't, I don't know, it's just stupid, you know what I mean? Sean Waltman's in the Hall of Fame now, all these years later, along with Chyna. But it's he was also responsible for that type of stuff. They were never saying, Sean Waltman won't be in the Hall of Fame because he had a sex tape, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, just, it's sexist, it's stupid. It was a really, a dumb answer, I think. And it hurt Chyna a lot to hear that, and we hear her reaction, so that obviously hurt her feelings quite a bit. So she called her mom while she was over in Japan. She kind of reconnected with her at that point. But while she was in Japan, she broke immigration laws because her work visa expired. And her mom didn't want her to go back to California. She thought that was the absolute worst thing to do. But she had to. She had no choice. She had to leave Japan. At the end of the day, Chyna just really wanted to go back to WWE. That was her family, and they just wouldn't welcome her back, which was really sad. And maybe she probably would have gone back at some point. She went to the Hall of Fame a couple of years ago posthumously, but that's only because WWE dragged their feet and didn't do it sooner. But, for example, I think she was over in Japan at that point, but when they did the first DX reunion in 2012, that would have been a great time to bring her back, which was just stupid that they didn't. So she may have come back eventually, but they went about it the wrong way. We see Anthony and Chyna visiting the WWE headquarters in 2015. Just really sad. You could tell that she wants absolutely no part of this. She's just in a terrible place at this point. The guy Rob, who I mentioned earlier, the producer who was a fan, lived in California with her for 3 months, and it really went well. It went very well until she moved over to Hollywood, and that was when her life went off the rails. She went out of control with the alcohol and the pills. She lied to her doctor, Dr. Drew, who we hear from on this documentary, about doing drugs, and Anthony kind of went behind his back about it, which was just, he's manipulating her and pulling the strings. It's just disgusting. So he actually wanted to reunite Chyna with her mom on camera. The mom didn't want it. Anthony gave her a lot of shit for it. She eventually agreed to do it. In the midst of all this, Chyna sent a horrible email to the mom. Why? I don't know. I don't remember what it was for. The mom backed out right beforehand, and it really upset Chyna. After all of that, Chyna fired Anthony as her manager, thank God. Unfortunately, it was too late, though. By that point, it was, 2016. She was in even a worse spot than she had ever been before. The guy Eric went to go interview her over WrestleMania 32 weekend, the same show that Triple H headlined, WrestleMania 32. And you can hear the footage. She's basically just outright begging for help. And he was hiding the whole thing. He's like, how does that make you feel? He's a fucking idiot, too. I know he apologized and stuff, but still, he's a moron. And Rob was like, listen, dude, I saw that footage. You need to get her the fucking help she needs. And he saw a video Rob did of Chyna with a black eye in one of her vlogs. He's like, dude, I'm not there, but you need to go get her the help that she fucking needs right now. Anthony's like, oh, let's do an intervention on TV like next week. He's like, no, dude, you need to help her right fucking now. It's immediate. Go help her immediately. So Eric was supposed to hang out with her maybe that day that she died or the day before. And we hear the last voicemail that she ever sent to him or just in general, which was just eerie. And he lied about meeting up with her and saying that he was sick, which he wasn't. He just didn't want to go. What a fucking asshole. So the day that she died, Chyna's lawyer was trying to call her, couldn't get in touch with her. He tells Anthony, hey, I haven't heard from her. Can you go check up on her? Which he does. He goes over there with a friggin' camera crew, like an asshole, and finds her laying in bed peacefully. I'd never seen anyone that peaceful before in their bed. And he fucking filmed the whole thing. And he has the footage, and apparently he brags about it, according to Rob, which is just disgusting. So we find out that she died from a lethal combination of muscle relaxers, painkillers, and alcohol. And Kathy thinks that it was accidental, but at the same time, she just wanted peace. She just really wanted the suffering to end. And her last text ever, apparently, was to Anthony and her mom about how much she hated them. And he has like a smile on his face while he's mentioning this. I'm like, what a fucking loser. So they had her cremated. The mom wasn't there, but she instructed Anthony, okay, go spread 3/4 of it go spread half of it in the Pacific Ocean, or 3/4 of it, and then send the other quarter of it to me. They sent a quarter of it to the mom, but they actually only spread half of it, and he kept the quarter of it and put it in an urn, which is just fucking disgusting. And he filmed himself spreading it, and he had a memorial for her and had fans take pictures with a bedazzled urn. Just terrible shit. So we come to find out that Eric was charged eventually with possession and distribution of drugs. Both he and Anthony lost control of the film, thank God, which is why we're seeing it here. Although they were involved with the project. And then just to kind of close it out, we hear a lot of praise for Chyna with Vince Russo saying that he doesn't think that Chyna ever knew the impact that she had on women, and she just never had a great support system. And then the last thing that we see in the doc is a Chyna promo from the late 90s probably, with her saying, I started the story and I'm going to end it, which is just eerie and terrible to hear now. It was a good documentary. I hate to say it was great, which it was, but it's very sad. You got to be emotionally and mentally prepared for this type of shit. And a lot of people already knew what happened to her. I learned a lot myself from this, but a lot of people did not come off well, specifically the people involved with the documentary of the resurrection of Chyna. But otherwise, this was, very informing. It's a lot like Dark Side of the Ring, where it's not entertaining in any way. It's just informative, enlightening. Go get the help you need if you're suffering type of thing. Hopefully it serves as a lesson to people going through something similar. Just terrible, terrible, terrible shit that happened to her in a very unfortunate series of events. A very unfortunate series of events for Chyna, which was very sad to say. But be sure to check this out right now over on Vice. It's it's a very good documentary. If you haven't already had the chance to check it out, definitely do so. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content, including hitting the bell button to be notified every time a new video goes up. Have an awesome week, guys. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.